The course tutor asked us all to imagine our client had turned up late to therapy, claiming the trains were disrupted. She invited us to suggest other possible reasons for this lateness. One student suggested it could be an act of passive aggression. Maybe our client was angry with us. Another student suggested it might be a self-worth issue. Some clients don't feel they deserve to have any time spent on them. Someone else suggested the client might be scared of personal change and that their lateness could be an unconscious attempt to sabotage the therapy. These and other speculations about the client's ulterior motives all received an approving nod from the tutor. When the suggestions ran dry, I added what seemed an obvious final reason. Maybe the trains were disrupted, just like the client said. The tutor frowned and said, no. She said we always had to assume the client had some motive. I was mystified. I said, trains do get delayed. Cars do break down. Sometimes things happen outside of our control to make us late. But she dismissed the point and repeated that we always had to assume personal motives. I said, when we assume personal motives that might not exist, we risk attributing our clients with imaginary issues they don't possess. That's not assisting them. That's actively adding to their problems. The tutor suddenly threw her hands up and shouted, if I don't assume my clients have unconscious motives, I can't work with them. I said, of course she could still work with clients without making assumptions. I said she could just openly check out with them whether there might be other reasons behind their lateness. She could ask how they were feeling about the therapy sessions, give them a chance to discuss any reservations or concerns in an open way. But it was crucial to be open to the idea that their excuses for being late could be genuine. I reminded her of a sentiment often attributed to Freud. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes things are just what they seem, with no hidden meaning or symbolism. She sat in silence for a long time, gazing at the wall. People in the group looked at each other bemused, wondering what was going on with her. Finally, she turned back to the group and moved on to the next exercise, as if nothing had happened. It was just another in a series of jarring outbursts by various staff members on a therapy course I attended a few years ago. I was already a qualified therapist at the time, and I'd taken the course purely to build on my existing experience. Other students, who hadn't yet qualified, had more at stake. Around a third of the group ended up leaving the course in response to continued misconduct and ethical violations by the staff. We were repeatedly directed to diagnose our clients with bogus psychological issues. Despite zero medical training, staff directed us to assume our clients' physical illnesses were purely psychosomatic and to keep clients in therapy at all costs, even when they indicated they were ready to end. We were told to warn them against the dangers of leaving therapy prematurely and falling back into old destructive patterns. When students disputed the training centre's practices, staff members suggested they had psychological issues that they should discuss with a therapist. The place was rife with imaginary defects. Of course, it's part of everyday life that we sometimes get accused of having flaws without any good evidence. But in certain arenas, these accusations can pack more of a punch. Therapy is one, religion is another. The manipulations found in the realm of religion are nothing special. They're just more highly structured and cloaked in a sense of untouchability called holiness, which is itself a manipulation designed to silence dissent. They're also more magnified. The same religions that piously condemn gambling ask us to gamble our entire lives on their unsubstantiated accounts of the universe. This religious wager extracts immeasurably more from us than a flutter on the horses. One of the biggest religious hustles is to persuade us there's something implicitly wrong with us. Christianity claims we all bear the stain of the original sin committed by the mythical first humans, Adam and Eve, when they disobeyed the Christian God by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Islam rejects the original sin story of its Abrahamic predecessor, but still depicts humans as inherently imperfect and emphasizes the constant need to atone and seek divine forgiveness. Its founder, Muhammad, outlined various ways to gain forgiveness. One involves what's called the Night of Decree, or Night of Power, which occurs in the fasting month of Ramadan. Muhammad claimed the Islamic God, Allah, would forgive all the previous sins of people who prayed throughout this night. The catch was that he didn't specify the date it fell on. Followers were told it was one of the odd nights of Ramadan's last 10 days. Some Islamic scholars openly admit this vagueness about the night of power is designed to get people to worship throughout the month in the hope of catching it. But even the most dedicated worshippers can have all their acts of devotion erased on a whim. In his book, Major Sins, revered 13th century writer Imam Dhahabi explains the sin of feeling secure from Allah's devising. He claimed folks who think they've qualified for paradise can have their destination deliberately overwritten by Allah when paradise is a mere arm's length away. Some apologists claim this is just a warning to individuals who actively indulge in sins on the assumption they'll be automatically forgiven if they fulfill their worshipping obligations. But Dhahabi points to a more far-reaching interpretation that implicates everyone. Anyone, good or bad, who dares to feel secure about their place in paradise can be made to sin by Allah right at the last minute and sent to hell. Dhahabi says Allah can choose to make someone agreeable, disagreeable, willing, or hateful, and cites Muhammad's claim that a person's heart is held between Allah's fingers, who can change it whenever he likes. What's being encouraged here is a state of perpetual insecurity. People are told they're psychologically sick, manipulated into chasing endless religious therapy, kept endlessly guessing about whether the therapies worked, and warned that bad things could happen if they dare to think they're doing okay. Joseph Smith, founder of the Christian offshoot, Mormonism, also rejected the Christian story of original sin. He said people would be punished for their own sins, not Adam's transgression. And of course, there is no justice in punishing people for the transgressions of others. But there's also no justice in punishing people for things that cause no harm to others. Just like other religious groups, Mormonism denounces a range of harmless activities as sinful. Sadly, when religious leaders label something a sin, many followers never question whether there's a valid basis for that label. Instead, they actively try to justify the label. Pick any random activity: singing, painting, using umbrellas, space travel. Label it a sin, and notice how easy it is to find spurious reasons to condemn it. When we learn to accept spurious reasons as a basis for our thinking, religious leaders can apply the sin label to whatever they like, and we fall unthinkingly in line, which is how perfectly reasonable, healthy, positive practices become poisoned with illegitimate guilt and shame. One area many religions have successfully stigmatized is sex. Mormon leaders classify many natural sexual expressions, including solitary, same-sex, and straight premarital activity, as the gravest kinds of sin. They even condemn sexual thoughts, embodying Orwellian thought crime. Virginity is venerated, and non-virgins get compared to used chewing gum. Ex-Mormons have reported religious lessons in which groups are invited to help themselves to a tray of cupcakes, one of which has been openly licked by the teacher. When it's the last one to get picked, the point is made: no one wants spoiled goods. But does this demeaning analogy stand up? In a 2016 paper for the Journal of Sex Research titled "Has Virginity Lost Its Virtue?", Amanda Gesselman and colleagues found that sexually experienced individuals held more appeal as prospective romantic partners. Even inexperienced individuals preferred a degree of experience in their mate. It seems non-virgins are often perceived as bigger cupcakes, not licked ones. Of course, the cupcake analogy is a red herring. Instead of making a moral argument, it just stigmatizes people. Any activity, good or bad, can be stigmatized. Immorality isn't defined by stigma. Murder and theft aren't considered immoral because they're socially unpopular, but because they involve identifiable harm. Without clear evidence of harm, the case against premarital sex fails. Manipulative groups often use analogies to try and short-circuit our thinking. But, just like fact claims, analogies need scrutiny too. Mormon Puritanism isn't only reserved for premarital sex. In a 1982 letter to its presidents and bishops, the Mormon Office of the First Presidency said married couples who were guilty of unnatural, impure, or unholy practices, including oral sex, shouldn't enter the temple before repenting and discontinuing such practices. Other religious leaders have also tried to interfere with marital sex. Muhammad condemned anal sex between married Muslims. Leaders in the Jehovah's Witness organization initially ruled that oral sex within marriage warranted expulsion. It then rescinded this ruling, conceding these marital intimacies were none of its business, only to make it an expellable offence again a few years later. Countless people struggle with unwarranted shame and anxiety because of stigmatizing religious doctrines. When people claim you're defective, don't accept analogies. Don't accept stigma. Don't accept charges of sinfulness. All these things can be applied to absolutely any activity. Ask for evidence. If evidence isn't forthcoming, the discussion's over. An area of life where evidence is available is discrimination, the unjust, prejudicial treatment of people, especially based on group categorizations. Some discrimination is brazen and unapologetic. Other kinds are more covert. As children, many of us learn to recognize the sly, unspoken subtleties of discrimination. My parents repeatedly terminated my friendships with certain children, but they'd never admit the reason was skin color. Instead, they took refuge in insinuations, labeling my friends unseemly, not respectable, and a bad influence. Of course, children soon learn to decode this language. When funny, warm, polite children are labeled a bad influence, it doesn't take long to identify the real issue. Some time ago, I was told about a psychological test designed to address more covert forms of discrimination. It was called the Implicit Association Test, or IAT, and its creators claimed it measured unconscious bias. When I took some of these tests online, I could see some huge conceptual problems. When I got my results, I noticed the creators had included a disclaimer stating these weren't definitive assessments. But months later, I was disturbed to discover that the IAT was already being used in workplace diversity training packages. The term unconscious bias has two very distinct usages. One simply refers to observable behavior that lies outside our awareness. For example, a teacher might favor some students over others without realizing it. Here, we can show people evidence of their bias, giving them a chance to understand and address the problem. The second usage refers to bias that lies outside the person's awareness and for which there's no observable evidence. When people don't experience biased thoughts or display biased behavior, allegations of bias become a matter of faith, leaving people unable to understand or address the supposed problem. The IAT comes under this second usage. The IAT is a reaction time test. It takes a single human characteristic, like skin tone, sexuality, gender, weight, age, and splits it into two categories. For example, age is split into young or old. Subjects have to categorize various images and words as fast as they can using two keys on a keyboard. In some trials, images of young people and good words are assigned to one key, and images of old people and bad words to the other. In other trials, young people and bad words are assigned to one key, and old people and good words to the other. Faster reaction times to certain pairings, like old people and good words, are taken as an indicator of unconscious bias in that direction and a predictor of real-world discrimination. Two crucial concepts underpin psychological tests: reliability and validity. Reliability concerns the test's ability to produce consistent results. One type of reliability, called test-retest reliability, looks at whether people who take the test twice show consistent results. The highest reliability score is 1. The lowest is 0. A value of 0.8 or higher shows a good level of reliability. The creators of the IAT have put its test-retest reliability at between 0.5 and 0.6. They've acknowledged this poor reliability risks high rates of error. If our goal is fair treatment, then classifying people as biased or as fair-minded when they're not is going in exactly the wrong direction. Validity concerns whether a test measures what it claims to measure. The IAT's creators claim the test measures attitudes, but as researchers have pointed out, even if it measures psychological associations, which is questionable in itself, Associations aren't equivalent to personally endorsed attitudes. They might simply reflect an awareness of stereotypes. The creators further claim the test predicts real-world discrimination, but even they admit to an extremely low correlation between the IAT and discriminatory behavior. In 2017, a team of practitioners in psychiatry and emergency medicine reviewed various studies in which the IAT was used to investigate bias among physicians. Of the 9 studies reviewed, 7 found no influence on clinical decision-making. The other 2 showed confounding results. For example, Alexander Green and colleagues found physicians who scored low on race IAT, indicating low bias, showed a big disparity in their treatment decisions. They were far more likely to offer a certain effective coronary disease treatment to black patients than they were to white patients. Meanwhile, high scorers on race IAT, predicted to show pro-white bias, treated both groups roughly equally. A 2012 psychological science paper by Jackie Varauer found that subjects who completed a race IAT behaved cautiously in subsequent intergroup interactions, limiting their self-disclosure and seeming potentially unfriendly or aloof. These kinds of anxieties and conflicts are predictable when people are told they might have psychological flaws without being given any sound evidence. They're left in an overly vigilant state, second-guessing all of their responses. Discrimination is not imaginary. It exists in overt and covert forms. But demonstrably unreliable tests like the IAT, which generate false predictions about discrimination, only serve to muddy the waters. We'll always find people suggesting we're flawed, but in certain areas of life, like therapy, religion, and the workplace, those suggestions can carry undeserved authority. When we're given observable evidence of harmful behavior, then we have something to explore, but not when we're faced with mere stigma and assumptions. There's no reason to entertain imaginary defects.